Thank you for coming. Excuse my back over that side. I used to be Ray Martin on stage. It's funny when people say that, if you've been on television a while, if you're not there 8 days a week, they think you've retired or something worse has happened. Given the fact we're here to tell some stories, I'll tell you a quick story, the true story. I was on the Gold Coast late last year doing something for 60 Minutes, and we were outside a police, we were doing something about domestic violence, as it happens, and outside the police station, and I was waiting for the traffic to stop so we could just do this piece to camera. And this is a true story. And a bloke walked by who was a sort of typical Gold Coast height. He was about 45 in a pair of shorts and a huge beer gut and thongs and a sort of carcinoma suntan. And he said, I won't use the language, but he said, Jesus. He looked, he said, I thought you were dead. And I said, no, that's a bit rude. He said, no. He said, no disrespect, right? He said, but for a dead man, you look all right. So I'll try and stay alive this morning anyway as we talk about it. Let me introduce these two fabulous young women who I have alongside me, given the topic. I don't know why they gave us the topic of mental health and retirees. Oh, no. We're much too young and we're not retired.
You don't know about the mental health part, though.
That's right. You qualify for that?
I think we're still working on it.
Well, last night at the opening, Ivan, the Mental Health Commissioner, spoke of the critical importance of this demographic of mental health, and he talked about it with older people. He spoke of, I hadn't heard that before, Susan, but he talked about the first 2 years of life being critical in a person's mental health development, and retirees, the bookends of life he talked about. So to sort out the topic, I have these two terrific women. Susan Duncan is the former editor of the Australian Women's Weekly and New Idea, and a journalist over a few years, and now a best-selling author and a novelist, all that in her spare time. Plus she has her own extraordinary life story to tell, which is relevant to today. Helen Everingham is a local, a Sydney girl who transplanted here some years ago. She lives on the Darling Downs. Most of her life has been a motivator, inspirational speaker and counsellor to hundreds of groups and gatherings. When I spoke to Helen for the first time yesterday on the phone, she was coming in from St George. She'd been somewhere west of the desert, I think, with her wellness organisation called the Centre Within, which you may be familiar with. Helen is always on the road, especially through regional outback Queensland these days, talking to schools and groups about effective living, the practical skills for life. So would you please welcome Susan and Helen?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, this is a conversation, folks, so we'd love you to ask questions rather than just have us prattle on up here forever. If you've got questions at the end, don't be shy. It's about storytelling too, not about giving you a lecture. Emma wanted us to talk about the new beginnings when we reach retirement age. So, Helen, let me start with you. What are the big ticket items, do you think, of keeping our mental health, if you like, as we get older?
Well, with new beginnings, often there is... we're scared about new things because we can be taken right out of our comfort zone. And yet I see retirement, not that I've retired, I've just slowed down a bit, but retirement as a fabulous opportunity to do the things that you love doing. There are lots of have-tos and there are lots of must-dos and there are lots of ought-tos through our lives, we all know that. But you've come to the point where the kids have grown up, they've left home, you don't have to do the job Monday to Friday or whatever you did. You can go and do the things that you love doing, and I think that is a fabulous opportunity.
But the old man may still be there, that's the trouble. The old man may still be there, that's the trouble. He's still got
that. Yeah, there's that.
Susan, special problems in terms of mental health?
I think it's very hard to readjust to a life outside what you thought was the only life while you were living it. When you were, as I was, catapulted out of the door of the Women's Weekly, you just think there is no other life because it's all you've done. Journalism is all you've done probably for 30 years by then. And to think of finding a new path, it's terrifying. You don't think you have any skills that are worth anything outside those four walls that you've been in. And I wandered around lost, I have to say, for a long time, buried myself in a bottle of wine or two, or perhaps a dozen here and there, and woke up one day and I thought there has to be more to it. I think the biggest thing that I learned was that you have to take a risk at a time when you're really risk averse because you think that you've got so much to lose. In fact, you've got nothing to lose. You can just do anything you like. You can try anything you like. It doesn't matter whether you win or lose, whether you're successful or a failure. Nothing matters except having a go and having the courage to have a go. And that's the hardest thing to find.
You mentioned that too. One of your newsletters, Helen, you were talking about almost evading the comfort, the sweet comfort of life.
Oh, yes. And really pushing outside your comfort zones. And that's stepping out. And it's scary out there. It really can be. I mean, as Susan was saying, you just have the courage to do it. I'm at the point in my life, and some of you might be at that similar point, where if you step out and you do it, and it doesn't work, you go and do something else. But it's that stepping outside that is really difficult. We set up comfort zones around us. They really are. They are self-imposed. And it can be very tricky to step outside those, to step out those safe lines. But if you don't, it's a bit like that old saying, if you've got to go out on a limb to get the fruit of the tree. And it's true. It's true. You just have to get out there and do it. And it's such fun when you do it. But it can be scary.
Susan, in your last two books, you write about the shifting realities of ageing, and you say it's not easy growing old, and yet you've both achieved with...
Well, I've got a husband that won't let me grow old. You know, he says, pick up this pipe, we're going to fix the irrigation down here. And, you look at this 40-foot long pipe and you think, where do I pick it up? But you pick it up, and maybe you, oh God, is that me? I always do this. I'm electric. Have I done something? I have. It's all right. We're all back on track. I did it at the Opera House once with Alexander McCall Smith. I kept banging my chest with the thing on, and I'm looking around to see who's making this terrible noise. And it was me. Anyway, the point is, you have a go. You do have diminishing physical abilities, but you learn to factor those into everything you do. So instead of doing 8 hours out in the paddock, as I did 5 years ago, now I might do 6 hours. And instead of having one piece of cake at morning tea, I'll have another piece at afternoon tea to keep going. So you just, you put in all these little reward systems, but you never say no. You never say, no, this is beyond me, unless it's going to do you actually some kind of physical harm.
Now, Helen, go on.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, you learn.
You learn.
You learn. You can only do so much. And that's fair enough, that you get to a certain age and you know you can't do what you did 20 years ago, and you try and do it and your body tells you, you're not going to do this, so you adjust. Yeah.
You do. And you get a good masseur. Sorry.
At one stage you quote Socrates, which is going back a few thousand years, but he quote, beware the barrenness of a busy life. What do you mean? That
we are so busy, sometimes we're so caught up in, again, the ought tos, the shoulds, the have tos, and we have huge amount of commitments in our life. But what we don't do is the things, so often we don't do the things that we truly love. We're always going to do those a bit later. Well, hang on a second. What happens here later? What happens? And that can be a situation. So do what you love now. I always suggest to people, sit down and write down to remind yourself, because sometimes we forget. We get so caught up. And if you don't do the things you love, it can be one of the greatest demotivators for everything else you do if you don't have those forms of self-expression. So whatever the things that are right for you, and that might be joining a book club or joining a choir, but some form of self-expression that is a balance to your life. Otherwise, why are we here?
But I retire. I no longer have to get up and go to work every morning. I'm no longer important. I'm no longer, I don't have job satisfaction anymore. Maybe I don't have the power that I had in the office or the factory or whatever it was. I'm not needed. I'm not getting a regular income. That's scary.
It is scary. Very scary. Now, the idea is you set that up before, but if you've come to that point where you have retired and you have nothing to hang on to, bear in mind that in our society, we tend to tie ourselves to our job. I've had many stand-up discussions in workshops, particularly with men, when I've said, you are not what you do. And I get this. But you've got to, build your empire, and you've got to support the family. But I can feel that dropping out. where was the train of thought? That because we have put so much into the job and we say that is so important, we align ourselves with what we do. Now, you can be living on the streets. You can be doing it rough. If that's your choice, that makes you no less of a person. We are human beings. Everybody is of value, but we align ourselves so much with. And truly, I have had stand-up discussions. And it can be men and women, but more often than not, it's men. And perhaps it's the way that we raise our boys.
Susan, you tried to retire and couldn't?
Yeah, I drank for 2 years, as I said. So I don't
Did you
remember
drink
much
for
of those 2 years. But the thing is, you one morning you just wake up and you think, I can't keep doing this, and I really must have something to offer. And the way I got back into thinking about life beyond a career was to get involved in community things. And on Pittwater, where we live, because we're all offshorers, we all commute by boat, and you practically need a passport to go to the dark side, as we call the mainland. There's a very strong community, and I know that strong communities make strong people. And you get involved in cooking for the Fireshed fundraiser dinner, and you get involved in the Woody Point yacht race, which, people are always looking for someone to come on the boat and bring a tray of sandwiches, even if
that'd be the same here, wouldn't it?
Well, it would be even more here, yeah. I would think. There are enormous opportunities to get involved in making your community stronger, and that is, for me, was the first step out of this kind of self-pitying hole that I'd allowed myself to fall into.
I notice there are thankfully some men here, and Peter, who's our sponsor, is here as well today. But I did a podcast for Fairfax a couple of years ago, and we did a lot of research in this. And it seemed to me, and please tell me I'm wrong, it seemed to me that women are much better at this than men. Women handle retirement better than men. Men get lost and go to the bowls club and sort of give up. Women suddenly blossom. True?
Yes, I think so. There are still, we can say men and women, there are more women that are in that situation these days than there were, say, a generation ago. But it's interesting, I'm on the road a lot, so I'm in my motorhome, and I meet up with a lot of women, and some of them are married, but the man doesn't want to leave home and she does. So she takes off for a couple of months and he stays at home and he probably does the bowls club and the whatever.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of single women out there, which of course you would know, the single women are the greatest rising group. There are more single women living on their own these days, and they're on the increase. And I do think that they.
But you've got your husband, but it seemed to me that women
Late life husband.
Okay. But women reach that retirement age, and women decide, well, I've got rid of the kids have grown up, the grandkids I can look after, the house hopefully is paid off. At this stage, the old man's, I don't have to send him off to work, he looks after himself. Now I can go back to uni, or now I can grow orchids, or now I can open a library, or all the things I wanted to do.
I think too, if you are married and you've got a husband who's retired, like my husband is a retired engineer, I find jobs for him. I keep him out of the house, busy. And the thing is, when something breaks, I automatically feel as though what I have to do to cope is lie down. I go to my husband and I say, oh, darling, I'm so sorry, the bathroom sink's blocked up. And he goes, oh, terrific, and he's in there and he's pulled it all apart. And that men need to be kept busy. My man needs to be kept busy. And I do find ways of keeping him busy. And sometimes I just think, why have I done this? Because it always becomes bigger than Ben-Hur because he is an engineer. And of course it increases the amount of work that we have to do every day.
There are lots of women laughing here. I think they've been there and done that.
They all know what they're like. And the second they sit down and have time to think is when they get a bit flat. And also keeping them dog-tired is fabulous at night. They fall asleep in front of the television. You sneak off with a book and it's all hunky-dory. Sorry, very rude of me.
All right, it is about stories, and older people often have to deal with death. the death of a partner, the death of their children or even their grandchildren. It's too painful. You've both got extraordinary stories and you've told the stories. Helen, tell yours. You lost your two sons, Tim and Sam, as young men in a plane crash. Why didn't you just curl up in a fetal position and give up?
I couldn't. That was a choice. Most things in life are a choice. I had been very fortunate, I feel, to come across the Centre Within course, which was the first 2-day workshop I did when my marriage was falling apart, which was back in 1983, and the boys were 4 and 6. And that was a turning point for me, and as I say, the Centre Within itself didn't do it for me. The man Bert Weir, who devised that course, this was in Brisbane, one of my brothers lived there and flew me up there. He didn't do it for me, but what I did was pick up with all of the things that Bert taught. And I'm not saying fabulous me, I'm just saying you've got to pick up and do it. Nobody else is going to do it for you. So I organised Bert to come to Sydney, because up until 2 years ago I was living in Sydney. Well, Bert came down for 13 years and I sat through his workshops and I learnt and I absorbed everything. And Bert said to me, one day you're going to run this course. So, am I? And of course I come from a performance background, I'm actually a singing teacher and a singer and all that sort of thing. So 19 years after that, the boys died, and I had been working with all of these very practical tools. So I always say, thank you, universe. I don't know how the universe works, but I was given those tools and I worked with them. So when the boys died, I had a really good attitude to life. That didn't mean I didn't fall down in a screaming heap. I did. The thing that I had was anger. I was so ticked off. Well, I had raised those boys pretty well on my own. Their father wasn't around a lot. And for the universe to take them when they were 24 and 26, oh gee, I was angry. But I have a very loud voice and I chose my time when I screamed it out, because as you realise with anger, you can't internalise anger because it will turn on you. And there are times when you actually can't express it because you might well have social problems. So you need to pick the time. But anger which is like the front for something else. But I got that anger out and I screamed. I had 3. And that was the thing. But I felt I'd been given some really good tools to work with. And now I pass those on to other people. So that's the joy for me.
So what would you say then? I mean, obviously, despite your training, you're still a mum and you've lost these two most precious.
Yeah.
How do you get over the grief?
You don't. You just work with it. And sadness. I have times when I'm sad. I don't have days these days, but there are times when I just need to. So if I want to wallow, I go and wallow. And then
So what's the advice? What would you tell the men and women here who may have a child or a loved one who goes?
Well, there is no explanation. You don't know why. If somebody leaves this earth early, as my boys did at 24 and 26, but even if you expect your parents to die, your partner has gone at an earlier age than you anticipated, probably the most important thing from on with everybody in every relationship is to treasure every person every day, because you don't know how the most of every day that you can. And I feel very blessed that my boys were here for 24 and 26 years and I actually have no regrets, which is terrific. So the things that I learnt when they were very little, and I would hope people take the same message from the workshops that I run, is to look after one another and treasure each other every day. Because you don't, without being maudlin about it, but you don't know how long you're here for. Enjoy every day. Oh, look, I always said to my boys, life is an adventure. And by gosh, they enjoy themselves for the 24 and 26 years they were here. And I truly believe that. Life's an adventure. Things are going to happen. We know that. The inevitable is going to happen and you deal with it the best way you can. But you make the most of every day.
I think Susan's interfering with both of our electrical
totally
currents
innocent.
here.
I've touched nothing. I haven't moved.
But Susan,
I do stop watches, by the way, so it could be me.
You lost your brother and your husband in the same week, and then you got breast cancer yourself, and you, as you jokingly say, you lost your cat as well. How did you, at the same time, how did you handle the grief?
Well, I drank, and then I came out of the drink. I think I hear everything that Helen's saying, and so it's so correct. You have to dispel the grief some way. And for me, it was writing Salvation Creek. Because the thing about people that you love when they die, the fear is that you're going to forget the little nuances that you loved. And so you keep this big ball in your head of them. And there's no room for anybody else. There's this massive grief and there's no room. When you write it down, you realise that you've got it there forever. You don't have to keep it in here anymore. And it doesn't mean that you have to sit down and write a memoir. It doesn't mean that you have to write for anybody else to read. You're writing as a therapy. You're putting it down for eternity in your life so that you can always refer back to it, and that person is with you in that stack of pages forever, or in my case, those people. It's terribly therapeutic. And then you can move on. Having said that, I mean, it's now 25 years, I think, since they died. And I find that the hole gets bigger. Everybody says, oh, you'll get over it, and you get on. You don't get over it, you get on with it. You do get on with it. And the hole gets bigger because I think of things that they've missed in the last 25 years. And you think, oh, God, my brother would have loved this. Oh, Paul would have loved this. And it's so sad that they've missed seeing these children and all of this. But then you put it aside again. It's a poignant moment, and you realise that to dwell in that area is really not doing anyone any good. And the great thing, I think, about getting old, and I'm not afraid of the old word, is that because you realise time is finite, every moment's brilliant. If you wake up and you're still breathing, you think, hey, good one, true. We're on it today, And that's such a gift. That is the gift of ageing. You don't have to worry about anything. You can insult a whole room of people, by the way, I'm trying not to. And you don't care. You just don't care. It's a fabulous freedom. It's the freedom of ageing. And if your knees hurt, so what? Take a pill.
Yeah. Well, again, Helen alluded to this, but you talk about the bonus years, the years you got out of, maybe that you didn't expect to have, or that you're now using every day, let alone every year.
Yeah, and my husband's 75, He wakes up every morning, he's got a glint in his eye, and he's ready for anything. And he says, well, you're probably going to outlive me. I said, you can't die till you've written the manual, because I'll have no idea how to run our farm, which is, completely off-grid. And he just laughs and says, well, I'm never writing the manual, so I guess I'll keep going. I mean, there's immense joy in small things too.
And you said that when you had your own cancer and you lost your hair, it was like liberation. It freed you. What did it free you from?
Yeah, because you're sort of so tied up in how you look and how your body is, and all of a sudden your body lets you down and you think, oh God, and this is totally a fake breast. And you look at yourself in the mirror. The first time I looked at myself in the mirror after the surgery, I actually fainted in the hospital, and which was terrific, really, because I got cups of tea all day that day instead of just when the tray came around. And you sort of, it's a terrible shock. And I remember thinking, well, what am I going to do with it at night? Do I take it off, and do I hang it up, or where do I put it? And my friend Valerie, who's very practical, she said, well, you just put it in a sling, dear, and put it on a hanger in your closet. And I thought, oh, I can't do that either. I didn't want it. I didn't want any of it. And then one day you just wake up and you say, well, hang on. I'm breathing. I'm okay. It's only one. And as Bob said to me after we got together, one's enough. And I was sort of which I actually never really thought about till about 5 years later. And the other great thing about things that happen to you is that you learn to adjust. The things that you think you're never going to adjust to that happen, you do adjust to them. You do move on. And my mother, with whom I had the most incredibly cantankerous relationship, the one thing she taught me was you laugh in the face of adversity. You never let adversity win. And I think that was the greatest lesson in my life.
All right. Helen, you have this word, the phrase about self-esteem being the most important thing in our lives. It's obviously just as important, or even more important, when you get older.
Oh, it is. Yes, it is. And look, my life is self-esteem is the single most important thing in achieving anything in life, because what we tend to do, we will only allow ourselves to have what we think we are worth. And we will shoot ourselves in the foot. We will stop ourselves from getting what we really want if we think we're not worth it. So, I mean, I run a whole sort of self-esteem workshop, and I do self-esteem with high school girls, and which is lovely fun. To get them at a young age is terrific. It's very tricky growing up.
When did you realise your self-esteem? When did you realise your self-worth?
Well, I was well and truly in my 30s. I feel like my life has been in two halves. I learnt all this after I turned 34 and the world fell apart, and I had things like a back operation because I had sciatic, all sorts of things. But I had no awareness at that stage. When I did the Centre Within course and I started to work with self-esteem, look, I've been a big person all my life, and I was like a second-class citizen. Well, that's what I felt like. But I'm an actor. Nobody would ever know I could win an Academy Award. But I really didn't get self-esteem until I started to work with all of this in my 30s, and somewhere along the line I realised that I am fabulous. Doesn't matter what size I am. And living in this society where we put so much importance on the physical. So self-esteem at any age is absolutely vital. It truly is.
Is it more a problem in older age because we stop doing that, Susan? Again, because we've both men and women, you reach that stage where you're sort of no longer important.
That's it. Yes, and a lot of people can see that as though all of the things that they've done all their lives, again tying themselves to what they've done, the empty nest syndrome. Sometimes women who are so tied up with the family and doing everything with the kids, and the kids go, "Hello, what have I got?" It can be quite your self-esteem can just plummet again because to what we do. And again, we're not what we do. We are wonderful human beings no matter what. We were born okay, we had good born, but we really had the stuffing knocked out of us. And we have to get that back again. So in older age, equally important.
Now for Susan, to be the editor of the Women's Weekly is one of the prime jobs for primarily women, but men or women in this world of journalism. When did you realise how good you were? When did you realise get some
about
self-esteem?
30 years after I left, I suppose. I mean, there is a factor in women's careers where you are kept down, and there were always men making decisions, like Richard Walsh, Trevor Kennedy. They were all there making the big decisions. And really, you're only, in journalism, as you know, Ray, you're only as good as your next story, or only as good as the sales figures that used to come in every Thursday morning in this envelope, and you'd kind of open the envelope, and if you were down, you sort of go into this decline, and if they were up, you'd have this euphoria, but it was also ephemeral, because then they'd come in again the following week, and we were on this constant emotional merry-go-round, which was all to do with making Kerry Packer money. It had nothing to do with you, really, and if you weren't making him money, you were moved on to less green pastures, as it were. So my self-esteem never really burgeoned until I wrote Salvation Creek, which was about grief, loss, finding out where you belonged, the kind of book that I thought no one would ever read, and why would they bother? And all of a sudden, it was a success. And I suddenly thought, well, I'm just like everybody else. We're all the same. We all want the same things. We all want to have hope. We all want to belong somewhere. We all want to be loved by someone and nurtured by someone. And actually, careers they're not the thing that you should be chasing to the detriment of everything that we think is small in our lives. The career is small. It's the emotional belonging and the loving and the caring and the giving. They're the big things in life.
Mm. And I guess you both referred to it, but we so often reach this age and we think, well, but I'm not very good at this. I've been just a housewife, just a mother, just a caretaker, just a and yet you both make the point that what you've done, you've racked up an incredible record of achievements, that you've actually raised the children successfully in so many cases. You've somehow paid off the house. You've somehow made sure the old man went to work, if that was the case, or you've gone to work yourself. And so you could tick boxes for incredible achievements which we don't accept, which we don't seem to acknowledge.
I don't think they're that important, all those things.
It
Really.
proves you
they're
can do
just day
things.
by day.
It proves you can do things, though. The idea of I now want to go to university, or I now want to grow orchids. Well, hang on, I've done a bloody lot of things in my life. I'm pretty
Do you
good.
know what? I'd really rather be able to make a meringue roulade in a perfect way, with the filling absolutely not falling out and the meringue not, breaking, which is a symptom of the age I'm at, I guess. We change with every decade, and our needs and our desires change with every decade. I've just reached this really nice place where I don't care.
Okay, all right. You in the House on the Hill, the last book, you talk about the need to swing wildly between euphoria and terror. So I guess you're saying what Helen said: take a risk.
Take a risk, yeah.
What have you got to lose? I mean, really, what have you got to lose? Nothing. After a certain age, you've got nothing to lose. Once everybody's out the door, your kids are done, your husband's either retired or he's gone off with a blonde. 21-year-old blonde or something. I mean, all of those things, it just doesn't matter anymore. Take the risk. The whole joy is the journey. It's got nothing to do with failure or success, because failure and success are in the eyes of other people. You know whether you've done a good job. You know whether you've been a success. Don't worry about what other people think. It doesn't matter. It's you. It's you.
Helen?
When I sold Sydney, well, what happened? 4 years ago, I bought my lovely orange motorhome, which they call the Helibago. Lovely, bright orange. I love people wearing orange, great. And because I'd been flying up and back, the workshops that I did sort of snowballed around country Queensland, and I thought, well, I'll do it by road. So I rented the house in Sydney, and in the back of my mind was the fact that I didn't really need to live in Sydney anymore. And what I loved about going around the bush was the sense of community, the country community. And that's what I was missing. And that's what I really think is important. So that was one of on my list of criteria, ready to leave Sydney. So I had some time, this was a couple of years ago, and I thought, well, I'll go looking. So I did my homework with my friend Barbara here today, and we did some homework about looking around Toowoomba. So one of my things was within 40 k's of Toowoomba, I wanted to be in a country community. So we did I think it was actually a pub crawl but we sussed out all of the places around Toowoomba, and I said, first, I'll do tour. That's the first. The Monday morning, I went to Pittsworth and was prepared to look for houses, and lovely Kate Droney, who is a local real estate agent, she gingerly said to me, this is going to sound very contrived, but Mark and I are about to sell our house, and I think it might suit you down to the ground. Would you like to at least drive past? So we drove past. I said, oh, this is amazing. It did my head in. So I found the house on the first day, and it all worked in beautifully. I let everybody know in Sydney, look, I'm buying this house in Pittsworth. And all my friends in Sydney said, who do you know in Pittsworth? And I went, no one. But by gee, it's a nice house and garden. And they said, but what if it doesn't work? And I said, well, I'll do something else. But you do it because it feels right. So I did Pittsworth, and I had people in my house, tenants in my house in Sydney, and we had to give them notice. Well, they moved out in 2.5 weeks. Well, that was wonderful. And one of the people I was sending all these photos to was my son Sam's girlfriend, who's now married and has a thriving business with 2 other women. They're 3 Birds Renovations. And when she rang me and said, oh my goodness, the house is gorgeous, you're moving to Pittsworth, and does that mean you're selling the house in Borkham Hills in Sydney? I said, yes. She said, we'll buy it. So they did. And they do these which they gave me a wonderful price. So within 6 weeks, I had a house in Pittsworth and I'd sold a house in Sydney. It felt right. But the whole point about going to Pittsworth was that it felt right. And it was scary. It was scary. I love it. I really feel I've landed on my feet. And I adore the country community. It is just wonderful. I've made wonderful friends. But if it hadn't have worked, there'd be something else to do. Gosh, in this country you can do anything. but often we hold ourselves back because we're too scared to do it. Get out there and do it.
I was telling Helen and Susan that over the last 4 or 5 years I've done 30 live shows with Sir David Attenborough, in which I sort of just ride shotgun and he tells these fabulous stories. And he's 93, so he makes me feel extremely young. And I said to him early on, now, excuse me, what's the secret? Because the brain's still going a million miles an hour, and he's had his knees done, so he walks pretty well as well, and he's just the most wonderful character, as you'd expect. But I said, what's the secret? He said, I'll tell you what the secret is. He said, the secret when you get older is that you don't do anything you don't like. You don't do anything you like because you like too many things when you get older. You only do things you love. If you don't love it, don't do it. Now, it's difficult when you're 40 or 50 or you're raising kids or even younger to do that, and you've got to pay the bills. But when you get, even if you're on the pension, it's that stage where you can simply say, and it's become my mantra, I'm trying to achieve it as well, but no, I don't like that. I don't love it enough to do it, and therefore I'm not going to do it. Would you agree? Is that the answer?
Absolutely, no question. I mean, time's running out. You're just stupid if you don't admit that and look it in the face and dare it to stay away for as long as possible. And why bother with doing things you don't really, really love?
Yes, but you say time's running out, but the other thing that came from that podcast that I did a couple of years back is that, gee, if you retire at 65 or 70, especially if you're a woman, you've probably got a good chance of living for another 20 or 25 years. That's a long time in life. It's a pity to go down to bowls club or simply just...
but don't you think it goes faster at this end?
Yeah, too fast. Yeah. So, but I mean, the idea of redirecting your career, your life, not career, but your life, that makes sense. I mean, surely you must talk to people about this, Helen.
Oh, yes. Look, I'm built like my great aunts, and they all lived to 98. That's a few years away. Just a few. To do what you really love at this point in your life, I think is absolutely paramount. Having been an actor, and I like that, but I don't really like, sorry guys, here they are. I don't really like filming. I love doing stage work. And I said to my agent, I don't want to do it anymore. And that was a few years ago, and that was actually really, it was really liberating. Because ads and movies, ads particularly can pay very well. But because it was a great source of money, but to really be firm about what you love doing, and that's part of your lifestyle. It's more than just living. That's about creating a lifestyle, especially now. And the people that I talk to out there, because I do a lot of work out in the bush, and they love being on properties, they love doing whether the cattle work, whatever it is. You've got to find all the other things, the balance in life. Find the other things that you love doing, without getting caught in the one thing. But there's so much that you can do, but it's got to be what you love.
Could I mention the cattle? I mentioned out there. I mean, we all hear about the drought, we hear about the suicide rate and so on. Obviously, men are being, because it is their life so often. What are you finding and what are you telling people? How do you tell someone who's faced 7 years of drought?
It's horrendous. And if you go out into the Central West, I've just been out to, beyond St George, out to Boland, and they had rain out there, so it's lovely to see some water by the side of the road. But if you get out beyond sort of Tambo, you go towards Lake Eyre Basin, it is beyond brown, it's grey. So the Mitchell grass is grey. And there's no stock. They've had to destock. And sometimes that's, and that can be 60 years of cattle that they really had to give up. So it's huge.
How do you motivate them? What do you say?
It's not easy. Because it can be, it is all so debilitating. Part of it is that where people are fourth and fifth generation out there and they see that their mothers and fathers and grandparents and whatever have been successful, you have no control over the weather, and that's one of the things that I talk to people about. We put so much time into it and energy into things over which we have absolutely no control. And I know that's part of the discussion, but how often, I hear out there with things like, dry up your way, is it? No, we could do with an insurance. Well, you can't control the weather, but it's one of those things that they talk about, you just need to get a bit of rain and everybody's spirits lift. So I talk about attitude. That, to me, attitude is everything. It's not what happens to you, it's how you handle it. And the workshops that I do is giving people practical tools to work with. And to get people, even though they are so busy, even the kids coming home from school, they come home from school and they have to get out and help with feeding and giving the cattle lick, and because everything is hand feeding. It's huge. But the other really positive thing about it is that it bonds the community. And there is the most wonderful community out there. I mean, I love it here. I love Pittsworth. I love that feeling of country community. And I think community is the thing that is really so important in our society. And they all help each other, look after one another.
Quite good too to talk to older people who've been through droughts. I remember a woman in Deniliquin, some young man had just killed himself and the whole town was very distraught because he was a beautiful young man and no one could understand it. But they were in drought and he was a farmer and he was, I think, 4th generation, and he felt he'd failed the generations behind him. And this old woman was sitting old woman, she's probably younger than I am now, but anyway, she was sitting in the audience and she said, "Oh, I wish you'd talk to me." She said the drought in 33 or 34 or something was far worse than this one, and, things come good. The danger is getting caught in the idea that nothing's going to come good. It always comes good. It may not be in the same way, but it always comes good at some point. And old people can tell stories, people who've been there for ages, and everybody has to do it their own way. You're not living up to other people's expectations. And it was this town in grief for this young man. And I thought, if only he'd talk to this old woman.
I suspect it's the women, because women talk, yes. Helen, but what do women tell you in your class as you go back and beyond? What are they saying to you? Not just about the health, what are they saying?
The women are wonderful out there. Look, the men are wonderful too, but they don't talk enough. Women to one another. I've just done a lovely workshop out at this place, Bollen, with 25 wonderful women, and talking about, and I was saying to them, "What's your greatest problem?" They said, "Our husbands." and they're out there. Everybody in the family has to go out and work. The fact
but
that
what do they say to husbands? Because they won't talk.
Yeah, no. That they're doing the things the same way, often they've always done, and I hear this a lot with men. "Well, we've done it this way for the last 50 years, why should we change?" So sometimes they get stuck into that. I guess that's familiarity that is really important, where so much these days is with drought and with all sorts of things in our society. There is a sort of a fragmentation there, there's a disconnection. And they're looking for familiar things, so they hang on to the things that they've always done without saying, "Okay, this might be the best way we've found so far." That's what women are finding. That was interesting. Just yesterday, talking to them, they were saying exactly this.
Yes.
But dealing with them, they get stuck in their same ways sometimes.
When I was doing current affair, and we had the last drought back in the early 1990s, and we raised about $22 million at that stage and gave the Smith family and the Salvos to distribute. And what they were telling us was that they'd go to men in a property and they'd offer money to buy tractor tyres or things like this. And the men would say, "No, I'm okay, it's the Smiths down the road, you need to look after them." And they'd go to mum, and mum would say, "No, we're desperate, we just need it." Now, how do you deal with that? How do you then get women to either get blokes to face it or...
It's like the $64,000 question.
Yeah,
I wish I knew the answer to it. But you're right, that there's always somebody who's worse off, and people out there, they won't stick their hands up. And they won't say. Now, how the women get around that. Women things like they've got together and they've done the Drought Angels thing, which is absolutely wonderful. But often the men will be resistant to all of that.
You're passing by, you're too wise. Tell younger women here, how do they deal with the men? What's your wisdom?
More sex.
Or more drink.
Or more drink. Both, probably. I don't know. The problem is, for men, everything is tied up in their success. It's what we've been talking about through the whole thing. Yeah. And if suddenly they start to feel like failures, the best way you can make them feel great is in bed. I mean, I'm sorry, but it's true. I wish I could say something else. I mean, it's just that kind of, I'm still the biggest person in this woman's life, you know, and it doesn't matter what else, we love each other. And the way that men show love mostly is through the things they do for you and in bed. And the way that women show love is the way they give to their men. And it's just that giving. It's always just that giving, and it's no blame, and it's just smoothing over the rough edges all the time and trying to keep things on an even keel. And that's what women do. Women do that really well. Men can't, you know, or men find it more difficult. I don't know, I'm not a man. But it's keeping a mental equilibrium in the home when everything outside it is falling apart. And sometimes that's just laughter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just laughter. Are you adding to the birth rate out in Western
Well,
Queensland
you did
as well?
say young.
Not necessarily, no. But can I pick up on the laughter thing?
Yeah.
That laughter is so important. It is one of the... somebody else. It's the one of the paths to mental strength. Having things like, yes, we sort of thing, having autonomy in your life, having a community to belong to is very important. And the fifth in those 5 things is laughter. And if you can't find anything to laugh at, go and find something. I mean, go and play with kids or watch a funny movie or whatever it is, because it gets the endorphins. And then Keflin's going, if you are in a drought situation, whatever situation you are in, you are under major stress, you're putting your body through fight, flight. And this is where we get out of balance and we get sick. And laughter is one of the greatest things to do. Really important. Sex might be important too.
Yeah.
Not that I can remember, but I think it was once.
I have our first grandchild, who's a little boy, who's 15 months, but I've noticed with him, who's my daughter's child, as with my daughter's dog, who's a border collie, who's the George Clooney of border collies, and women can't resist him. And when I walk in, but I was just thinking the same. I think the same. I wish I was 40 years younger when I walk this dog, because he's such a chick magnet. This dog. But I was thinking what I was saying, that it's in terms of laughter, it's impossible to stay angry or glum around children or dogs, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's you mentioned laughter. Your L's. I forgot the fifth, but it was love, laughter, lessons, listen.
Oh yes, all my L's.
All the L's in that.
Yes, all the L's.
But listening. What do you mean by listen?
Oh, listen to understand is one of the most important things, and that means listening without the intent to reply. Because usually what happens when somebody is telling their story, what's our brain doing? It's thinking about what we're going to say. And the thing is, we might not have heard the story. So and it really is a learned art. And we may come up with wonderful stories that are really helpful, but have we heard what the message truly was? And I'd say this particularly with kids, really listen to understand. So that's what I mean by truly listening.
I remember seeing. I've given up on you, Susan. That's all. You've destroyed this one. I remember the first time I went to China in the 60 Minutes thing and seeing an old man who's obviously a grandfather with a grandchild sitting in a gutter, and there was communication there that we often don't have ourselves with children as parents, but grandparents do. We're talking about that sort of age. There is something special about that, not just the charity work that you both speak of, but also about embracing your own family and the families around you in a small community like yours, isn't it?
We just had our grandchildren staying from Melbourne, 3 little boys. Those little boys, 8 years old, 6 years old, they were up before Bob to help feed the cattle. So they're waiting at the shed by the truck at 5:15 in the morning, and Bob's staggering out of bed at 5:30, and they're going, where have you been? Feeding the cattle was no drama with the little boys along. It was just so easy, and Bob felt as though he was giving something, and it was life-affirming, new life, young life. It's so affirming of everything, because it goes on. It doesn't matter what we do or what we think. Here it is, coming up, and you have a chance to influence in those absolutely imperative small ways, the way children think and learn and what they take in.
Yes, I must say that if you talk to other grandparents when you become a grandparent, they will always say the wonderful thing is, as against your own children, is that you can give them back.
Yes.
That's the worst thing about it. I hate giving it back. I wish that I was an old Italian family where, we built an extra room on the back and they lived at the back of the house, because I hate it. I try and convince my daughter to stay, etc. So it's, the joy is just so much there. I want to go to some questions. We're almost out of time, but let me just sort of finish a question that you ask often in the book, Susan. You ask of Bob, your husband, are you happy? Are you happy?
Am I happy? Well, happy is a really weird word, I think. I think I'm totally contented. Happy, I'm happy some days. The drought, obviously, because we're now on a farm, is terrible. It's terrible. You wake up some days and you just think, oh God, this is just so depressing. I don't know how I'm going to deal with this, and all of a sudden you can't water anything except trying to keep your fruit trees alive, and then you just get out and you just start doing. And once you're doing, you stop feeling depressed about it all. You think, well, actually, I've still got lemons on this tree and I've still got plums coming on here and whatever. So I would say the contentment is the creativity of every day comes from the creativity, and that every day can just be something as simple as weeding around the trees, or, seeing a batch of, because we grow barley grass at the moment to feed the cattle, and you get a good batch that's really hung together and it holds in its little brick that's about this long, and you go, how did we bring that one on, and why isn't this one as good? It's those wonderful moments of little successes.
Helen, are you happy?
With the contentment that Susan's saying, and certainly I have my moments, but for the moment, and when we're back to doing what you love doing. I love the people I meet, and there's enormous satisfaction in what I do. Feedback that I get from people that they love the workshops I do, but even the other part of my life where I sing, I line dance, it's fun. All those other things I do, and I've only recently found I can draw. That's exciting. Yeah, so there's an enormous amount of peace in my life, happiness. It would be, but for the most part, but certainly.
Okay, we've got time for some questions. Yes, ma'am, please.
Can I just quickly say, remember Pamela Clark, the Women's Weekly food
Just
editor?
repeat the question if you didn't. Lady just said that last night SBS had a program about dating for the over 60s. Insight, okay. And so the question was whether the ladies have any advice.
Pamela Clark, who is the former food editor of the Women's Weekly, wonderful woman, makes the best scones you've ever eaten in your life. She retired. I knew that Paul Purvis, who lives in Elvina Bay, his wife had died 2 years earlier. I knew they were meant for each other, okay? I just knew it. I don't know how I knew it, but I knew it. So one New Year's Eve, I had them all
A matchmaker.
cooking. Oh, I'm so good at it. I put them next to each other making paella at our New Year's Eve party, all along a long table. I made all the men cook dinner except Pamela. I put next to Paul Purvis. They have been together for 2 years. She is 70. He is 75. They are madly in love. They've got a little bure or something in Fiji where they go to and do whatever they do in Fiji. She comes up to me, she says, I've never been so happy in my life. It does not stop at any age. I do think you have to look at somebody's background, because I was always terrified when I was single that I'd pick up on an axe murderer, because you never do quite know. It's really good to try and see that they've had a good emotional life in the past. So you have to be a little bit practical and not get carried away by hormones, which I did. And of course it was completely disastrous. And then I met my husband and it all worked out. So, not that you have many hormones left over 60, but the half hormone you've got that's still going, okay? You need to be a little bit careful and a little bit cognizant and take it a little bit slowly. But there is no such thing as no romance after a certain age. It is a different kind of relationship. It is, I think, much richer, much less fraught, and much more satisfying. But certainly there. Testimony.
Okay, Helen, advice for the love law?
The advice. Two friends of mine in their 60s. Oh, thank you. Right.
Mine is the only one working.
Two friends of mine were married only quite recently, both in their 60s, and of course, dear friends who have been saying to me, why don't you find somebody nice? And I'm so busy hurtling around the country. But I am open to suggestions. I've always felt, for me, that I wouldn't be on my own forever. That's just one of those things that's kind of hanging out there. But I think...
But you wouldn't be.
I would. Oh, I'd be open to yes. But I always felt that I would not be on my own. Okay, you're right. Come and visit, Susan.
I'm a bit busy with a young bloke and the daughter of someone, but he lives in Brunei at the moment and she's in Canberra. But I'm working on it.
You're working on it. But it's one of those things, yes, it never leaves you. And I said to a friend of mine only recently, I've got fabulous women friends, got great men friends. I love talking to men. There is something different about talking to men. I just love it. And may that never leave. They have a different perspective, which I find fascinating. Different to women. I love the women friends I have, which is great. We have wonderful conversations. But there is something, I can't explain it, but something about talking to men.
I agree entirely with your comment about finding what you would do. Is what we've done in our work.
Yes.
And often we end up as managers or leaders.
Yes.
Do you mind having this microphone so everyone can hear? I'm sorry to do that too. Thank you.
You also made the comment about community. My experience of community is that as we move further and further west from the coast, the community becomes more and more stereotypical. And if one is less part of that stereotype, it is more difficult to feel part of that community or to have good self-esteem.
Thanks, mate.
Any comments?
Yes, it can be. I've had the joy of the last sort of 15 years doing lots of travel to lots of little... and getting to know, I have a whole social structure out there, which I just love and adore. There are a couple of parts to your question. Can I just go back to the fact of men, and this is something that we were speaking about earlier, just a suggestion, because men often lock themselves, and women do it as well, but mostly men, into, and that's just been the nature of their job and their situation. Can I suggest one of the best things to do is to go back to being a kid? Do you remember, and you've probably all done this, lying on the grass, looking up at the tree, imagining your Malvern Star bike that you're going to get for Christmas or whatever it might be. And that was called daydreaming. And it's something that we adults don't necessarily do. No, and this is very important. Daydream is very important. So to go back to being a kid again, go back to that daydreaming. Find out what you really love doing, because that's just gone because you've done all sorts of other things in your life. I think it's one of the best things that we can do. Get your creative imagination working and really come up with the things that you truly love. So that was one part. Great thing to do. I love, because so much of what I do is about giving people things to do that will be really helpful in making changes in life.
And Susan, you raised that question in your, I think, the last book about do we revert to our childhood?
Yeah, I think we do get a bit... I think, you know, I remember my mother when everything blew apart, she went back to where she was born. I think we do go back to things that are familiar and safe, but we don't have to. We don't have to. We can just break new boundaries all the time.
Okay, I'm getting wound up, but if there's anyone who has a question you'd desperately like to ask, Don't be shy, because we can say no to Emma. We're the only ones who can. You've
God,
got one,
you're
yes,
brave.
sir, yeah.
Do that.
Susan, you talked about...
Take the mic, please.
Right. My name's Ian Morgan. You talked about retirement, and one of the things that scares me is what am I going to inflict on my wife? You know, she's got her life, and all of a sudden I'm there.
Well, I mean, that's
it really frightens me.
yeah, I can understand that. And I think that you both have probably got enormous adjustments to make. Enormous adjustments. But, you know, you listen to it. It's what Helen said. You listen to each other. You find out what everybody wants. You find your own way of going. She will find her own, and you will come together. You will find things to do. Bob and I actually don't work very well together, I have to say, because we're both used to being bosses. But we've learned how to actually accommodate each other's egos, dare I say that? Or bossiness? Not egos, bossiness. And you do learn, and it's a new stage of your life. You're going to have lots of pits and lots of mountains and lots of things that you're going to have to learn, but you will work it out. You will. And you know what? It'll be better and it will be richer. I just know it. 'Cause not from personal experience, but from seeing everyone around me. You know, they work it out. It's not that scary once you're in it. Sometimes anticipating it is worse than the actual reality. And the reality could be quite nice. You might actually talk to each other.
That's almost it, unless there's anyone this side who really has to do it. No? All done. Thank you. I know where to go for advice in future, ladies. Wisdom's enormous. When I'm in trouble, I'll ring you too. Would you please thank Helen and Susan? And thank you so much.
And would you join me in thanking our esteemed chair today, Ray Martin, as well, please?